went to a wedding recently and I was reminded again of how quickly the whole thing passes. I mean, the planning for this thing takes months, and the actual celebration, if you include the reception, it's over in a few hours. I'm not suggesting anything needs to change. Believe me, as many weddings as I attend in a year, if they were longer, I'd have to figure out a way to make a living as a professional wedding attender. I guess the reason it struck me is because I love the story in John chapter 2 where Jesus attends a wedding in Cana. That wedding would have been very different from the celebrations we attend in 21st century America. The groom would have most likely worked for a year to earn the right to take his bride as his wife. During that year, he and his betrothed bride would have been technically married, but they wouldn't have consummated the relationship until the year of payment had been fulfilled. I mean, think about Joseph and Mary and you'll get the right idea. Joseph had taken Mary as his bride, but they had not yet consummated that relationship. She was still a virgin bride. Now, when the year of service was ended, the wedding feast would have been at hand. That's where we pick up the story in John chapter 2. This feast would have lasted for 7 days. The whole village would have likely been involved. In order to give the bride and the groom some intimate space, the family would have vacated the home and given it to the newly married couple. The bridegroom would have taken his veiled bride into the home where she would remain sequestered for 6 days. During that time, all of her needs would have been met by the bridesmaids, which is where we get the tradition that we still celebrate today. Now, the story was very different for the bridegroom. He would have entered into the home to be with his wife, but then re-emerge into the celebration that was going on outside for the balance of the week. The street party that happened in the village was a way for everyone to be a little distracted while the bride and groom got to know each other. So when Jesus' mom shows up and announces that they've run out of wine, it's kind of a serious matter. We're undoubtedly at the end of the feast, and it's about to end badly because the culmination of this whole celebration is the final wedding feast, where the bride is joined to the groom's side and life traditions back to the normality, with the groom being at the center of attention of the whole week. After all, he's the man who's been blessed by God with the gift of a wife who can bear children who will carry his name into the future. Jesus' mom shows up, catches him and says, "We have a problem." Mary's probably related to the groom because it would have been the family's responsibility to throw the party. There's a quick interchange between Jesus and his mom, and eventually Mary turns to the servants and she says, "Whatever he says to you, do it." The servants are instructed to fill the water pots to the brim. Draw out some water and give it to the master of the feast, the man who is presiding over the celebration. He's most likely the rabbi of the town. We won't make this our lesson, but did you notice in the story that the servants obeyed without hesitation, without reservation, meaning they didn't just fill the pots, they filled them to the brim, and without explanation? I wonder how different life would be if we all did the same. Anyway, back to our story. Verse 9 and 10 say, "When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and didn't know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, 'Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You've kept the good wine till now.'" The odd thing is that the story just sort of ends there. Most people don't take the time to ask what that response from the master of the feast is all about, so I want us to ask that question. Why does it matter when the best wine is served? Been to a lot of neighborhoods where a great deal of money is spent on the entryway to that neighborhood. Kind of makes a statement about what sort of people live beyond the gate and the rock walls and the bushes. Let's call it a good first impression. If the bridegroom sets out good wine when the party begins, it makes a statement about what kind of wealth he has. If he makes a good impression up front, he can afford to skimp a bit on the backside because the statement's been made, "I can afford the good stuff." That establishes the groom in a good light as a blessed man. However, in our story, the groom has taken his best shot. Now he's come up short. He's run out of wine. Jesus is called in to do what the groom cannot do. Not only does Jesus answer the call, but he does it in a way that's better than anything the groom could offer. The master of the feast tastes the wine, and notices that it's better than anything that's been served the whole week. He makes his observation known to the groom, and then the story just hangs there, waiting for a response, looking for an ending. Here's the thing to notice. We're at the end of the feast. The bride's about to be presented. If the best wine is served now, it draws attention to her rather than making the best impression for the groom. He's already had his chance to make a self-glorifying statement. Did he save the best for the last because he loves his bride that much? I think that's exactly what Jesus had in mind when he performed this miracle. Look, Jesus is the vessel of our purification. By shedding his blood, he submitted to God, glorified God, and gave honor to the bride, his church. And now the groom has a chance to do the same. He can admit that he has no idea where the wine came from and glorify God for the miracle that took place, and in so doing, he can allow the honor to rest on the bride as she is presented. Or he can take credit for the whole thing, cut God out of the picture, keep the glory of the moment for himself. There's our lesson. What will we do today? When the opportunity comes to give glory to God for the miracle of our salvation, will we save face and keep our social reputation intact? Or do we glorify God and let honor pass to another? The story's left hanging because your verse is yet to be written. Let's put a good ending to this story as it plays out in our lives today. Glorify God, honor others, and become the servant who knows where the wine of life truly comes from.